Too loud? No. Okay. Let me quickly begin by saying my name is, of course, is Don Casey. I was in the Navy back in the 60s, spent 4 years in there, retired from U.S. Steel, 33 years, another 10 years at UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham. I've been studying about Agenda 21 Sustainable Development, and we really should not focus on Agenda 21, which is this document. We should focus on the philosophy of sustainable development and what it's doing to our society. Any good presenter always tries to tell you what he's going to tell you, and then tell you what he told you. So with that, this is my effort in trying to tell you what I'm going to tell you in this presentation. First, we're going to look at sustainable development. Then we're going to look at how it is at the global, national, state, and local level. It is in your comprehensive plan at county and city level throughout the entire country at varying stages now. If you haven't rewritten your comprehensive plan lately, it may be slightly outdated, but even if it was written within the past 20 years, it has the tenets of sustainable development. We'll look at how it is actually changing the lifestyle of each and every community throughout the country, and then we'll look at the true purpose of government for the United States of America. Recognizing the problem is of course just 50% of the solution, and I'm very glad to say that the state of Alabama has indeed recognized the insidious nature of something called sustainable development and has actually legislated a law against it. We are the first government in the world that has recognized this. As soon as this went on the books, we got a call from people in Australia, and two of us from Alabama went to Australia and told them how we had been able to make the legislature aware of the problems and that indeed they did adopt the law. Now, there are several states that are following suit. Florida, Virginia, Georgia, and Tennessee are currently working on sustainable development laws. I do want to point out that one thing about our law that needs to be incorporated in each and every one of them, as in Virginia's does not. Virginia has not recognized other international law or ancillary plans that contravene the Constitution of the United States and the Republic of Alabama. That clause needs to be in each and every one of them because it's not just Agenda 21. President Bush signed that document in 1992. We have many, many plans of actions and many pieces of legislation that predate even the naming of this philosophy called sustainable development. So if your state is thinking about adopting a similar law, make sure that it has a clause in it that covers beyond Agenda 21. Sustainable development is a religion, and I really believe that you, as most people have seen this presentation, will concur that at some level, in fact, it is a religion. It has a long legislative history. NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, was passed in 1969 by a very liberal Congress, signed into law by President Nixon. It has the tenets, the kernels of sustainable development. That was the first year, by the way, that we had the Earth Day celebration, and it is just a coincidence, I'm sure. It is the basis upon which society is being restructured. It is a self-regulating governance system. Governance is the rules and regulations that govern the behavior of individuals, organizations, and companies. That came from the United Nations Human Development Report of 1999. Listen for it. You're going to hear that word frequently. It will literally replace government. It is a coalition now of government, non-governmental organizations, government, and businesses of all type, including charitable organizations and what we consider to be religious organizations. There is the World Business Council of Sustainable Development. There is also a United States Business Council for Sustainable Development, and these are just some of them. There's over 200 that belong to the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. And when I was driving up here, I happened to notice that Cargill had a huge plant somewhere north of here. I don't exactly know where I was, but if you'll notice, Cargill is right there and Monsanto is right there. Now, Monsanto and these other ConAg businesses are involved in genetically modified organisms. I don't think this is going to bode well for your appetite in the coming future. That's just one aspect of this coalition of government and businesses. This is a slide that I have put together. Most of the slides that you're going to see after this are slides from proponents of sustainable development. I always try to use the most authoritative information that I can possibly find. Where it is government, I always try to use government instead of some other entity such as the Sierra Club or the Nature Conservancy. Now, I really think that this is going to turn out just exactly like it was in the 30s and 40s, and these people that are in this picture were adamant about their position and their socialist agenda. And I think that the people today, their descendants, ideological descendants, are just as adamant about their position. And I think you'll agree in just a few minutes. This is nothing hidden. There's no conspiracy here. A conspiracy is two or more people who in secret plot to commit an evil act. This is not secret. If it was secret, I certainly wouldn't be able to find this information, or you couldn't. And we, the United States of America, has agreed to submit a report to the United Nations detailing what we have done, what money we have spent to implement the philosophy of this sustainable development. And this is a 156-page report. Go out to the United Nations website database. It's alphabetically listed. Scroll down to the U's. Click on this report. You can pull it down just like anybody else. We also have a report that was submitted in 1997. This is the latest one. Goes into some detail. For instance, a community block development grant. I would imagine most of the elected officials are quite aware that many communities around the country have already accepted money under that community block development grant, and indeed it's listed in this particular report to the United Nations. Now, typically what happens with conferences, for instance, the Agenda 21 conference held in '92, they'll wait 10 years and have another conference to celebrate what they had accomplished in the last conference and look forward to the next coming 10 years. So here is the 2002 conference, which was a celebration of that 1992 auspicious occasion where President Bush signed us onto this document. Now, when I punch the button, you're going to see a total of 9 slides go by. The first 7 slides are of the opening ceremony. You're going to see a photograph of what was occurring at that particular conference in Johannesburg, and you're going to hear a wise man stand and tell a group of very young people what is wrong with Mother Earth. Now, he has a heavy accent. I have printed on the screen what he had to say so you can follow along. After he gets through, then you're going to see 2 more slides, and you're going to hear Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State for President Bush, the 43rd President of the United States, stand and say that you and I have an enduring commitment to something called sustainable development. Hopefully everything works right. We have had problems. Here we go.
Then came the plants, the animals, and finally the human beings. Yes, we are all children of Mother Earth. That is why we must take care of her and be her custodians. She is the hand that feeds us and the heart that heals us. But I'm sad to say, we are failing. Greed and foolishness are eating deep into the fabric of humankind. We are failing to love and care for Mother Earth.
This summit has cemented a new vision of sustainable development. The Johannesburg Plan of Action consolidates our work plans into one common agenda that includes our best thinking on sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, President Bush and the American people have an enduring commitment to sustainable development.
Well, that was 2002. Now let's move forward to last year, June, as a matter of fact. And here is Hillary Clinton and what she had to say about all this.
We have coalesced around an outcome document that marks a real advance for sustainable development. We know this is one of the most pressing matters of our time, because how we grow together over the long term isn't a question for only some countries. It is a question for all countries. A more prosperous future is within our reach, a future where all people benefit from sustainable development, no matter who they are or where they live. And that is why in the 21st century, the only viable development is sustainable development. We also have to be thinking different about development in our cities. Under the joint initiative on urban sustainability that President Rousseff and President Obama kicked off last year, we are bringing political officials from every level, from state, county, local, municipalities together, along with industry leaders and developers to find creative ways to generate sustainable economic growth. Let's use the private sector, particularly the consumer goods companies, as they have agreed to do, to make sure they have sustainable supply chains, the right kind of packaging and marketing that puts the least amount of burden on the earth we share. Let's bring in the nonprofits, the civil society organizations, faith groups, individuals, all of us committed to realizing the sustainable development goals that we have embraced. We know that we will be judged not by what we say, nor even by what we intend to do, but by whether we deliver results for people alive today and whether we keep faith with future generations. I'm very honored to be here with all of you, and I pledge my country's, the Obama administration's, and my own personal efforts to continue our work together. We simply cannot afford to fail. Thank you all very much.
I'm going to spool this up and I'm going to mute the sound and just tell you what this lady has to say. This was testimony in 2010 before the Banking Committee. And the senator on the left over there is my senator, Senator Shelby. He is well aware of all of this agenda that's been going on for quite some time, and he refuses to speak to the issue. He claims to be a conservative, constitutional senator, or at least recognizes the Constitution. In my opinion, he bears more blame than does his opponent, Senator Dodd, on the other side, because he refuses to acknowledge this and speak publicly about it. Now, Mrs. Googe, who was at the time the Carroll County Commissioner, Carroll County, Maryland, and she talks about the 20-year history of the National Association of County Commissioners' involvement in implementing something called sustainable development. Believe me, she sprinkles her speech, her 5-minute speech, with a litany of sustainable this and sustainable that. She talks about local government is going to determine where and how development will occur. She talks about setting aside 100,000 acres of the property in that county for something called green space, open space, linear parks, conservation easements, transferable developments, purchase of development rights, a number of different programs, all aimed at setting aside 1/3 of her county for future generations. Well, you know what's going to happen to the property tax. There's going to be a loss of property tax, and the other property owners are going to have to make that up. This land also comes off the productive rolls. In other words, the people that were making a profit and a living off of that land no longer will produce anything for the open market. Of course, that means that revenue, generally speaking, will not be there to support government. So this is a double whammy. This is a big hit. This is going on in your locality just like it is in Alabama. So there's some bad news. The legislation that she was lobbying for actually passed. It's the Livable Sustainable Communities Act of 2010. Money is flowing out of Washington to your local community if you can get the grant. There are some localities that have not qualified for the grant, but that doesn't mean that they're not trying. For instance, Chattanooga is trying to work up a consortium of regional governments that will include Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. They did not get the grant, but they have $4 million from other sources where they're going to start this anyway. So this is an ongoing problem of NGOs and other organizations coming in, foundations to fund this where the government will not or cannot fund it. Now, the good news is that her opponent ran on an open anti-Agenda 21 platform and soundly defeated this woman. So, yes, it is worthwhile. We are at the point where no longer we wear the tinfoil hats. This is a reality. You've already heard people speak, presidents, representatives speak about sustainable development. If you want to deny that this is going on, then I'd say that you have the right to wear the tinfoil hat that you used to accuse me of. So, at any rate, by the way, Commissioner Rothschild, who replaced her, has now rewritten the comprehensive plan for that county and is going around talking about what he's doing to dismantle what this woman actually put in place. So these things can be reversed. We can vote these people out of office that are irresponsible with our dollar and our rights. So with that, now let me talk about what I did in trying to prepare for coming up here. I went to the State of Ohio's website dealing with a revised code and just did a simple search. There is a search window on the website, and it's right there. And all I did was type in sustainable and then hit the end button, and turned out with 9 hits in the revised code. Now, it's a problem that our education system throughout this country has not taught us the difference between the state constitution, the revised code, and the administrative code. And that is a big problem. We're going to have to overcome that to understand the pecking order, if you will, of where we are within the system, as I have already been talking with some people before the meeting, and we'll continue to do that tomorrow. Won't get into any great detail, but there is a great deal of difference between the revised code and the administrative code. At any rate, there are 9 hits in the revised code and 11 hits in the administrative code, and I do know that administrative code has ordinances written into it dealing with wellhead meters. So if you have a well on your property, you will wind up having to put a meter on it to determine how much of Mother Earth's resources in water you're extracting from the ground. This is a handout, and I think Glenn has a copy of it for anyone that might want one. Now, there are several treaties involved in Agenda 21. One of them is the Climate Change Treaty. It's kind of changed names over the years. At one point it was the Kyoto Accords, and now it's generally called the Climate Change Treaty. This is a soft sell, and I have other quotes from places in Tennessee that you won't see tonight that are the soft sell. And this is just one quote from Athens County. Now, I've had to comment, Athens County is a real liberal county, so that's why you're seeing this particular quote. Or at least the people are saying that's why this quote is written this way. But believe me, it doesn't have to be a liberal county. The quotes from Tennessee that I was referring about are just exactly like this one. This one says, from the standpoint of land use plan, how do activities in Athens County contribute to global warming? Well, this is a foregone conclusion that global warming is occurring. So automatically, there's no question. It's this theory now that is in fact being taken as fact. Can development be planned in such a way as to limit energy use and preserve the woodlands and grasslands that act as carbon sinks? This is an official policy statement adopted by the elected officials. It needs to be rebutted in the proper fashion. If it's allowed to stand now, it's like adverse possession. The longer it stands without any kind of formal rebuttal, the more the judge is going to look at it and say it has validity and may actually say you have no standing if you were able to bring it to court. Now, that's the soft sell. Now I'm going to go to the hard sell. This is an ad that was produced in England, and it really lays it out what these people think ought to happen to you if you don't agree with their hard sell. So here we go.
Right, kids, just before you go, there's a brilliant idea in the air that I'd like to run by you. Now, it's called 10-10. The idea is everyone starts cutting their carbon emissions by 10%. Thus, keeping the planet safe for everyone, eventually. Now, this hasn't got to be a huge thing, but I would love it if you and your families would think about doing something.
What sort of thing, miss?
Well, like getting your dad to insulate the loft, or taking your next holiday by train instead of flying, or buying energy-saving light bulbs.
We're thinking of using our car less. I'm going to cycle to school.
That's fantastic, Jemima. Now, no pressure at all, but it'd be great to get a sense of how many of you might do this. Just a rough percentage. That's fantastic. And those not? Philip and Tracy. That's fine, that's absolutely fine. Your own choice. Okay, class, thank you so much for today, and I will see you all tomorrow. Oh, just before you go, I just need to press this little button here. Now, everybody, please remember to read chapters 5 and 6 on volcanoes and glaciation. Except for Philip and Tracy, of course.
Right, just want to check on that 10-10 thing. Had some brilliant ideas from lots of you how the firm can cut down emissions by 10%. Just quick show of hands, everyone who wants to get involved. Great, that's nearly everybody. And yeah, just for the record, no pressure. Those who aren't quite convinced about it yet. Cool, it's no problem. Your choice. Okay, so those of you planning something here or at home should probably get working on it. Oh, gorgeous. Those of you who aren't... Excellent. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Well, hello everyone. It's great to be back here at Spurs. So many happy memories for me. Anyway, tell me something. What is this 10-10 thing the club is doing?
Well, it means that we're trying to cut our carbon emissions by 10% this year, and Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was the first to sign up.
We've changed the floodlights at White Hart Lane, so they're low energy. Lots of our fans are coming to matches on buses, trains, bikes and stuff, rather than coming by car.
I see. Whatever, I wouldn't do it. It seems like distraction from football to me.
That's just fine, David. You don't have to join in, just ignore it. No pressure. Well, lads, let's do some penalties.
10-10. Hundreds of thousands of people, schools, businesses, hospitals, movie stars, knitting circles, scout troops, presidents and governments, all tackling climate change in more than 40 countries. Care to join us? No pressure.
Is that okay?
Sounded great to me. Thanks,
okay.
Gillian.
Happy to help.
So what are you thinking of doing for 10-10 yourself?
What, are you kidding me? I thought that by doing this voiceover, that was my contribution.
Right. No, absolutely. No pressure.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jesus.
Bad enough. You have one eyeball right there, and you have another eyeball right there. Now, I want to make the point here that our men that fought World War II went across Europe, and they saw everything that could be seen in war, the mutilation and all of the horrors that went with it. So there was a decision made that the sights that they saw, films and photographs, would not be shown back home because they didn't want to upset the folks back home and maybe withdraw their support of what was needed to prosecute this war. So these men that were battle-hardened entered Dachau and all those other places of horror, and they saw what had happened when a socialist regime had finally gotten their way with everything. And they said, we have to document this. We have to show this for future generations. We can't let this be swept under the rug of history. Well, those photographs were made after the fact. This is before the fact. Sit back, do nothing, and this agenda will move forward. It is time that people that know and understand what their unalienable rights are stood up and become and made their point known. We can't just sit back like we've been doing. We have to be accountable for what we have to be. Now, this slide is, like I say, Agenda 21 is just one conference. This is Habitat 2, 1996. You'll see in a few minutes a quote from Habitat 1, which was 1976. This is the actual slide and graphics from the program that was given to the United Nations at that particular conference by the Washington State University. Now, there were 3 gold medals that were given out at this conference, and this program won one of them. Now, the reason I have this up here is because it has the actual definition of a sustainable community. Go to some of these visioning sessions where you have those professional planners and facilitators that are well versed in all this and ask them what a sustainable community is, and invariably they're going to say, well, it's just whatever you want it to be. If you'll just tell us what you want, we'll write it into this plan, and we'll just poof, voila, it'll be produced. Well, I'm old enough to know that things like that don't really happen. And this actually has the true definition of a sustainable community. And it is one which provides all of its own needs for air, water, land, food, fiber, and energy resources within the confines of its own site. That is the objective. I don't have any doubt that it will never work, but that doesn't mean that the federal government and other governments and other planners and a whole litany of university professors are all pushing to bring this to fruition. So now, let me talk about what freedom of choice might mean for an individual that is lucky enough to live in this utopia. Now, this document is under construction, Tools and Techniques for Local Planning. It is a publication of the state of Minnesota. Just want to make that point clear. And it has the definition for freedom of choice for those that might like to live in these nice, sustainable communities. It says that people should be able to choose where they live and do business as long as they pay the identifiable cost of those choices and do not impose unaccounted for costs. Right now, there are unaccounted for costs that you're currently not paying. Now, that is associated with people, or now or in the future, and nature. Now, there's 3 tenets that are listed in this particular definition. The first one is intergenerational equity. In other words, we have to look down the corridor of time, determine that there would be coming generations that would need to use the gasoline that we're currently consuming. We need to reserve for those future generations that same amount of energy for them to use later on, and restrict what we're accessing from Mother Earth. That's intergenerational equity. Intra-generational equity is ensuring that all of Mother Earth's resources are equally shared across the current generation. And then we have something called species equity. Now, of course, since we are just one of the species that has evolved to the status that we currently enjoy, means that we are robbing from those other species the ability to evolve equally. So we have to ensure that everything is equal across the board. Now, that sounds like a rather pie in the sky type thing that, that never will happen, when in fact that already has happened, and we are already acclimated to it because we have the Endangered Species Act. Under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, there is something called the Council on Environmental Quality. Go out to the White House website, and up at the right-hand corner, there's a little button, tab that you click, and it is the Council on Environmental Quality, and they are there to determine the criteria by which a toad frog can have more rights than you do, the property owner, or a butterfly, or a blue jay, or whatever species they think is endangered or may be endangered. They will equate that species more rights than you do. Now, think about this. This is a religious law that we have just enacted and become acclimated to, because God has given man dominion over the earth, and here now is a council appointed by government that is sitting there determining what rights you can or cannot have in relationship to that animal or plant that may be on your property. So this is a usurpation of God's priority within our system. It is not the system that we were founded on, by the way. Now, I use this particular slide to divide it into subject matter, and every time you see this slide, I'm going to another subject matter. I call this the wheel of sustainability. It is just some of the linkages, quite literally, to sustainable. I mean, sustainability is all-encompassing. So as I punch the button, in this case, I'm going to talk about food policy and what that's going to mean to your appetite and what you may or may not be able to obtain under this process. This is a bullseye from Clackamas County, Oregon. We have in the center the urban center. Surrounding that is the metropolitan food shed. Now, thinking back on the definition of sustainable community, look at the information on the right-hand side there where we have food shed, wood shed, water shed, and energy shed. And yes, I think all of them ought to be taken to the wood shed in this particular case. But that all harkens back to that definition of sustainable community. And any food that is consumed within that urban center is intended to be grown in that metropolitan food shed. Any food that comes from outside the food shed will have a tariff or some other price increase associated with it. I won't say price because there may be just things that you might have to do in order to acquire the ability to have that carrot for your evening meal. This is a slideshow. It's actually intended for nutrition experts in the Seattle King area on the West Coast. I'm only going to pull up one objective of this particular slideshow, and that is social and environmental justice from seed to table. Everything associated with putting the seed in the ground must be social and environmentally just. That has to be measured. The farmer has to be measured. His employees have to be measured in order to determine whether or not the food is viable for the market in the local area. In Alabama, we have already had several statewide food summit, and this is just one of them. This is 2009. This was actually the front page of a newspaper. And if you'll notice the ASAN, and that is right there, that is the logo for the Alabama Sustainable Agricultural Network. Currently, they are garnering support for organic food, organic certified food, and food that's grown locally. Sounds wonderful. We want to protect the local farmer and the local community. In fact, it's actually a slow suicide situation for the farmer because the money, if it's not coming from the federal government, the money for backing this is coming from other organizations. And those organizations typically would be Cargill and some of these other large corporations supporting certification and BMP, something called best management practices. The farmer is not going to have the resources to keep up with all of the BMTs and have certification of his food to go to the market in that local area. So this is a slow suicide for those individuals. As a matter of fact, the Alabama Sustainable Agricultural Network has 990 forms on the internet, and that's how we know that their money, in part, is coming from the federal government. Now, in an effort to explain all of this, or at least some of it, we have put together a pamphlet on sustainable agriculture, and I have that's one of the handouts I have. If I don't have enough, let me know. I have more in the car. If you know of a farmer that's not here and would like to have some information, might be interested in it, please give him one of these handouts. Now, if you like the information in the handout, I can give you that entire handout without our logo on it, so you could put your logo on it, a sticker maybe, that would help build your constituency in this local area. So it might be something that you might want to think about in trying to alert people to what sustainable agriculture is all about. In Alabama, we already have a food charter. It is in its infancy. In other words, it's the first version that's been floated out to the general public, and I dare say very few people in the Birmingham area really know that it exists. One of the planks of this particular food charter says that access to nutritious, affordable, culturally appropriate, and safe food is a human right. So we have to provide that mouthful of food for that individual, no matter whether he will work or not. In Ohio, you already have the Food Shed, and you have in the Cleveland area a Food Coalition. I'm sure at some point they will write for you a food charter that will include all manner of things, as we'll go over in just a few minutes. Here just are a few of them. This is a Food Policy Council. They have written a food charter. Here is one of the tenets of it. The term food citizenship is defined as the practice of engaging in food-related behaviors that support rather than threaten the development of a democratic, socially and economically just, and environmentally sustainable food system. Now, the point I like to make about this particular quote is that you're not going to sit on the fence. If you have no opinion about this, you are threatening your food citizenship. You must be on board. So a little bit later, we'll look at the triple bottom line and see how your happiness is involved in the support of the system. Now, this quote is interesting because it says that food democracy, food citizenship, that is, recognizes that consumers, in other words, when you go to the grocery store, you should be able to understand that your food citizenship is recognizing food workers, other consumers, future generations, and other species. So we're talking about intergenerational equity, intra-generational equity, and species equity, all in this one quote. Now, the reason I think this is important is because this was in a doctorate thesis for Drexel University. In other words, a student that was trying to move up that education ladder had submitted this report with this quote in there, thinking that she's going to get a doctorate. So you can kind of see how far this has already gotten in our school system. This is a food charter. It's also one of the handouts that I sent to Glenn, and I'll quickly go over just a couple of paragraphs. This paragraph right here deals with food security. And I really thought that, if I had a refrigerator full of food, that's all I needed to be concerned about regarding food security. But in fact, we must have culturally acceptable food for everyone in the community. So if you have an influx of people from the Middle East or maybe other countries, you may not have sufficient culturally acceptable items in their diet. So you may actually have to ship something in for them in order to have food security. Now, this paragraph right here deals with allocation of resources and greenhouse gas emissions. So the farmer has to be concerned with how much greenhouse gas emissions he's actually producing. Methane gas from cattle is one of those things that needs to be regulated. We just have too many. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. Perhaps methane gas from other things also. But at any rate, social justice is one thing that's wrapped up in all of this, so I went out and got a definition of social justice. And it is progressive taxation, income redistribution, property redistribution, equality of opportunity, and equality of outcome. So all of those things now have to be written into your food policy. With all of these things, typically you're going to find new words, and this certainly was a new word for me, locavore. And I was giving a presentation at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I brought up this slide, and immediately two hands went up in the back, and they said, "We are a locavore." I was quite surprised that I was actually meeting someone that had already dedicated himself to only consuming food grown within 100-mile radius. And if you'll notice in this magazine article, that individual has used something that is sustainable. In other words, he has chosen to take a bicycle and ride out and into the farmland and gather whatever he's going to eat that night. So he hasn't restricted future generations from attaining that finite resource of gasoline. So he has a plus, not a demerit, on his balance sheet in this new community. So now food miles, and this is a poster that is intended to go on a school wall. And if you'll notice, we have all manner of transportation, and associated with each one of them is some kind of degradation for the environment. And then we have this great big huge yellow caution sign. So I can see a group of young people, maybe 8, 9 years old, standing listening to a authoritative figure who would possibly be the teacher, talking about how you should feel guilty if you're eating a carrot because it may have harmed a butterfly just because they flew it in from California, or maybe even a blue jay. You never know, and it just puts a guilt trip on the individual child. Some of those costs now that you're not paying, remember the freedom of choice, would include transportation, soil degradation, irrigated-related groundwater depletion, pesticide and fertilizer misuse. USDA has already declared fertilizer to be a pollutant, has to be regulated. I was in Florida making a presentation, put this slide on the screen, and somebody said, oh, we already have to regulate the fertilizer that's going on the lawns throughout Florida. So these are part of the codes. The ICC, I was talking earlier with some people about the International Code Council. They have 14 volumes of regulations that are just sitting on the shelf waiting to be adopted by the local community. Typically what happens is that the community will adopt only part of them. The ICC rewrites those codes every 3 years. If your home or building or structure, whatever you have on your property, is in compliance this year, it does not mean that the next time they write the code that you'll be in compliance. There's something called the amortization of nonconforming use. So if you're declared to be in a nonconforming use over a period of time, your usefulness of that property could be condemned, declared to be blighted, and torn down because it does not fit the objective of the community through the comprehensive plan. Here now is transportation and sustainability. I always thought transportation was just a means to get me from point A to point B. Indeed, transportation is not an end in of itself. It is merely a means by which we support individual and collective goals and objectives. Socialism, just plain and simple. This is a quote from the Transportation Funding Options for the state of South Carolina, 2003 through 2022. Equity issues include income distribution, urban, rural, and regional geographic differences, and by now you should be able to recognize that last one, intergenerational equity. Yes, ma'am, you're correct. This is the best quote that I've seen regarding transportation, and this is the cover page for this report produced by the state of Tennessee, the Department of Transportation for the state of Tennessee, 2009. The first approach starts with the premise that we need to convince people to change the way you live. You just have the wrong attitude about everything. We just need to change that attitude. The primary objective of this approach is to reduce VMTs, vehicle miles traveled, by restructuring society in such a way that our needs such as work, shopping, personal and social services, as well as recreation, can be met in our local community by driving short distances, walking, biking near homes. Really, it comes down to the fact that if you hear a federal official especially talk about options in transportation, they are walking, bicycling, or public transportation. I don't think I've ever heard a federal official lately, the last 10 years say, talk about driving. They usually talk about those three that they're going to offer you in these sustainable communities. This is one quote from Agenda 21 that I'm going to pull out. This is a 3-sentence paragraph. I'm going to pull 2 sentences from this particular paragraph. It says, commonly used indicators such as the gross national product and measurements of individual resource flows. So we're talking about what you're extracting from Mother Earth. Do not provide an adequate indication of sustainability. This was 1992. Indicators of sustainable development need to be developed to provide solid basis for decision-making at all levels and contribute to a self-regulating system, a self-regulating governance system. That was what I was quoting about in the first. Well, now, what is a self-regulating governance system? And I hope this may be able to be illustrative in that point. This is the I-95 Coalition. This is Maine, goes all the way to Florida. It also includes some authorities in Canada. And here now is the name of this particular report. You can type this in if you're taking notes and want to go look at it. It's about 34 pages long. Multi-state VMT, vehicle miles traveled, base fee, institutional, and legal analysis. Very simply, what this report says is that right now you have a computer system in your car with GPS, and it tracks and knows where you've been and when you were there. So let's say that you drive through an ecologically sensitive area and you have disturbed a butterfly or perhaps degraded the environment for a blue jay. So now when you drive up to the gas pump, that information about where you've been and when you were there is transferred to that great big database in the sky, and the amount of mitigation fee, the sin tax against Mother Earth, is assigned at that point, and you have to pay for damaging that poor butterfly or that blue jay. Now, the report goes on and says that we don't think that some of the local municipalities would exactly buy into the program. I really think that if we continue down this economic path and the local communities are continue to be strapped for money, all they have to do is hold out a hand and they're going to receive a check from this program. There's not going to be any ordinance or any taxes levied. Nobody's going to stand over your shoulder. It's simply if you want the gasoline, you're going to pay the price. The other concept that comes into play here is the fact that we're driving more fuel-efficient automobiles. So we're using less gasoline, and there's less revenue going into the coffers to maintain roads and do all those other social wonderful programs that they can think of. And there has actually been reports out of California and Louisiana already talking about charging you on how many miles you drive. I think this will be an incidental thing that will be added in. You may never even know that you're paying for damage to the environment or other social justice programs. RFID chips. How many people know what an RFID chip is? Oh, we have a better crowd here. Usually we have about a third. It was about half. Radio frequency identification device. And this has been around for a long time. Nothing new about it for you folks that already have seen this. Now we have, this is a paper carton, that's a medicine cap, of course a flip-flop, and this is sewn into the lapel of a coat. Makes perfect sense for a merchant because the merchant knows how many coats he has on the shelf, made of what material, what color, what size, and he knows when it's sold and actually who it goes out the store with. So the database is already set up to replenish those coats of that color. So it's a real-time advantage for the merchant. Well, there's other applications for this. For instance, we have a reader on this shelf. Now, this is a slideshow made by a company that sells RFID chips. And you'll see that it's showing various containers that could be put on the shelf. The reader reads the information off of that RFID chip, knows when it's been taken off the shelf, knows when it's put back. It can literally read whatever information the chip is designed to emit. So if it has an expiration date, for instance, it would alert the person that's in charge of this department that it's time to dispose of it or purchase new items along the shelf. Well, it also is in your food packaging. And this now is a situation where we can just fill up our grocery cart and walk right on out, and it will take you'll go from a plus on one side to a minus on the other as the credits are transferred from your bank account to the store. Now we have what's called smart fridge to go along with this. I was talking to a man that actually sells RFID chips and was asking him about the plausibility of putting a chip on a container of ice cream and let it regulate and determine, not regulate, but determine the temperature of the ice cream. So let's say if you buy a half gallon of ice cream and for some reason you're delayed getting home and the temperature rises above the maximum limit where it's considered safe, you put it in your smart fridge. By the way, stimulus money under the Obama and Bush administrations was an incentive to buy smart appliances. Smart refrigerators was just one of them. So when you get home with this carton of ice cream that's now over the safe limit, you put it in the smart refrigerator, and it reads that information on that chip and says, uh-oh, it's not fit for human consumption. And it displays it on the screen. And it transmits that information to that great big database in the sky. And I was in a presentation with the Director of Sustainability for the City of Chattanooga, and I was asking him about the triple bottom line. See, he was talking about the triple bottom line, which we'll learn about in just a few minutes. And I thought, well, now what kind of question could I ask him dealing with the triple bottom line? And I happened to come up with the RFID chip. And I said, how would the triple bottom line and RFID chip work together? And he was just enthusiastic about his response. He said, oh, we have readers on trash cans that we're experimenting with now so that we know when you dispose of an item and we can credit you for properly disposing of that item. So now if the great big database knows that you're supposed to dispose of this ice cream and it doesn't appear in the trash container at the appropriate time, I don't know what might happen. That's up to conjecture of what the code enforcement officer might feel is appropriate at that time under the ICC codes. So that was just one example of the RFID chip. And here now is the schematics or drawing, if you will. There's a manufacturer, transportation to the grocery store, to the home, and then into the trash container where you're going to be properly credited for environmentally safe conduct in this utopia. Let's pick up on social health now, and we'll look at the triple bottom line. This is Director Bosworth. He was director of the USDA back in 2003, and he was talking in this speech about the National Report on Sustainable Forest. You see, every federal agency is required to write reports and regulations on sustainable development and ensure that each of those regulations is moving the agency towards this goal of sustainable development. In 2003, it was annual. Now it's biannual. So every spring and fall, there's a new set of regulations that each agency floats out that you and I are expected to adhere to. Well, he talks about this. He says, in other words, sustainability depends on how social, economic, and environmental. Anytime you talk about sustainability, you're talking about those three specific items: social, economic, and environmental, and how they relate. And that relationship has now garnered its own label. It's called the triple bottom line. If you're doing research, go out, type in triple bottom line in quotes, put in PPT for PowerPoint presentation, and you will wind up with all kind of presentations dealing with this particular subject. Now, I went to the Department of Transportation for the state of Ohio, and I typed in triple bottom line, and lo and behold comes a whole, there was more pages than I wanted to look at. I thought this one would be instructive because it talks about climate change. Climate change and sustainability for the Department of Transportation in the state of Ohio, and then it goes in and talks a little bit about the triple bottom line, but it doesn't really give you a good idea about what we're talking about. So I want to bring this particular slide up. Now, this is a global program that we're talking about. So every country is doing this, and this one is from Japan. Now, typically you see three circles with sustainability. Japan's just a little bit different. They have a triangle. And in each corner of this triangle, we have one aspect of sustainable development. And coming up out of that is happiness. See, we have to be happy. And here's what it says. To be sustainable, a society must satisfy the requirements of the triple bottom line. However, that alone is not sufficient. The feelings of people living in society are also important. Even if the triple bottom line requirements are satisfied, society is not sustainable if you feel unhappy about what's being done to you. Therefore, we define a sustainable society as one that satisfies the triple bottom line requirements and makes you feel happy. So now what would make you feel happy? Well, this goes on and says universal health care. And this column right here goes through and describes each one of these, and we get down there and it talks about the universal health care a little bit. Now, GSF stands for Gross Social Feel-Good Index. Now, it's unfortunate that we have already been acclimated to this because I was looking at a comprehensive plan for the County of Washington published in the year 2000. And there is a survey that has determined the attitude of the people in that county towards that comprehensive plan. It is a feel-good index. They just don't label it. In other countries, they're more blatant. They don't worry about it because they know probably that the people in that country can't vote that elected official. Well, he's not elected. He's appointed. We have elected officials. If we knew, and this was blatant information that we could recognize, those elected officials wouldn't be in office very long. And this bureaucracy wouldn't be doing what they're doing to us. So that is imperative that we understand the verbiage and what it means. Now, if you go out to our website, and I encourage you to do that, keepourrights.org, scroll down on the left-hand side, there's a glossary. And they have those words and phrases that the commissioners, not commissioners, but planners would be well-versed in. They have a whole litany of new definitions that they have assigned to words that you would be comfortable with. So if you go into these meetings and they begin to talk about the carrying capacity, and you don't stop the meeting and say, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by freedom of choice? What do you mean by all these phrases that you're comfortable with? Then you have lost that meeting. You've lost the control over your own environment. And believe me, this is moving much, much faster than you can imagine. So let me pick up now on land use planning and greening development and the Biodiversity Treaty. It is one of 3 treaties of Agenda 21. It has not been fully ratified. Makes no difference. The President signed this. And the agencies of the federal government are implementing it. And various communities across the country are enacting bits and pieces of it. Conservation easements are all part of this program. There's a whole litany of different items. For instance, in Alabama, I'm probably pretty sure it's going on here, the federal government is giving farmers money to fence their creeks and wetlands off so that their animals can't get to the creeks. That's part of this program. Now, simply put, every plant and animal that European man brought to this country is considered an invasive species. All predator animals that were here when European man came are to be reintroduced. So if you're seeing wolves, bears, and other animals that you didn't see when you were young, certainly we're seeing them in the area where I grew up, they have been reintroduced, and they will be considered protected under this new criteria. Now, let me say this, the slides you're about to see are not my slides. These are all slides produced by the federal government. This is the Southeast Ecological Framework. Southeast was the first section of the country to be mapped under this program, and we have now 50% of the continental United States is to be set aside for animal habitation only, 10% buffer zone, and 40% of the remaining land mass is to be where we're going to live. This will not happen overnight, but I assure you by the time they jack gasoline up to $10 a gallon, and they have septic tank regulations and other regulations, a regulation for this or that, it will be unbelievably hard to live in the rural sections or areas where they want to empty it and allow animal habitation only. So now let me go on and talk just a little bit about this particular slide. We have an eco hub on one side and an eco hub on the other side. Generally speaking, these are to be 5,000 acres or larger, but you could have a puddle that a stakeholder would declare to be an eco hub and have to be set aside, and you would have to maintain it in a status befitting whatever edicts that stakeholder committee had determined it should be kept. Don't know that that's going to happen, but you could wind up with that situation. Now, in between these two eco hubs, we have something called an interconnecting corridor. And we want an animal of whatever species from one eco hub be able to move from one eco hub to the other eco hub and never hear a sound made by a human being. Never see a structure created or built by a human being. Never know that human beings were ever on this earth. And the reason is because we want that animal to be secure in his domain, and also we don't want him to intermate with his own species in that eco hub and degrade his gene pool for the next 1,000 years. And that's basically it. I do have literature that backs that statement up, but now let me talk just a little bit about this particular slide, because I've given you my opinion and my verbiage on this. Now here is their verbiage, the federal government. It says, linear features linking core areas wind through human-dominated land like agriculture or development allow animal, seed, and pollen movement between core areas. Linkages calculated separately between forest, wetland, and aquatic core areas. Now, I said in the beginning that we had gone to Australia and we did. We went down there and they were complaining because this treaty is affecting them. And they had just declared the Coral Sea to be an aquatic core area. And people from Australia were not allowed to fish in that aquatic core area. It's the size of Texas. We have the Coastal Zone Management Program. I was in northern Ohio. That Coastal Zone Management Program will create an aquatic core area around that Great Lakes. The same thing's going on in the Gulf Coast. New federal regulations, I was just informed, in the Gulf Coast now allow for commercial fishing only 27 days out of the year. This is going to make it very difficult for fishermen to stay in business and for you to have something to eat in the way of seafood. This is a big change in society. Now, Alabama passed a constitutional amendment, state constitutional amendment, back in 1992. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough information back then to base a educated vote on, and unfortunately, I voted for this program. We are taking money out of the taxpayer's pocket in Alabama and purchasing land, either outright or conservation easements or any number of things, in order to set aside land for this very same program. All of the red area that you see in this map is currently land that is set aside for these types of things, open space, green space, whatever you want to call it. It also includes federally owned land, parks, and other types of lands that are included in this program. Now, when I punch the button, you're going to see the map come on from the federal government showing how much land in Alabama is going to be set aside for this program. Don't know about that. We hadn't got there yet. Now, all of the green, the really dark green is the core areas, and then the lighter shades of green, some are interconnecting corridors, and then there's what's called PEAs and SEAs. PEA is priority ecological area, and SEA is sensitive ecological area. Basically, they have all the same definitions. So now in Ohio, back in 2000, you voted in the Clean Ohio program. Almost identical. I went and looked up some of the literature on it, and it's very similar to the one going on in Alabama. And it says, this amendment enables environmentally safe and productive development of publicly and privately owned land. The process will be accomplished through land acquisition and other means. You see, that's one of those words that you don't know what the definition is. You have no idea what other means is. Are they just going to regulate your use of it so that you can't maintain it, you can't make a dime off of it? I have no idea because it's not defined, and you didn't ask for it to be defined. Now, let me say that there are court cases that say that the Declaration of Rights in a state constitution is the authoritative section. So if other means is in violation of that Declaration of Rights, it would mean that that section that is not concurrent with it would be stricken. This is going to be a hard row to hoe because you're going to have to find someone that is willing to go to the ropes on this thing in order to prosecute the situation. It is going to be difficult to reverse this, if not impossible. You might want to consider repealing this, but it looks like it just got refunded, I think. I'm not sure about the current status of it, but it's something that you certainly would want to look into. As with the other state statutes and administrative code, you need to talk to your local representative and begin the process of striking those from the books. Here is Tennessee. Lewis County, Tennessee is outlined. Now, if you go out to our website and look up Lewis County, Tennessee, you will see a Q&A between myself and a group of people in Lewis County. And they had just seen a presentation very much like what you're looking at. And this now was a dialogue between some of the elected officials from Lewis County. It so happens that Lewis County had adopted a proclamation back in 2009 that said that everyone in Lewis County should adopt sustainable development and inspire their neighbor to do the same thing. So the county commissioner stood up and said, if what you're saying is true and it's valid, we will rescind that proclamation. So it'll be about 30 or 40 minutes worth of the dialogue, and then you're going to see the Lewis County Commission sit down and rescind that proclamation. So this is by no means a done deal. We have the means at our disposal to become educated on this issue and bring this issue to our elected officials, and they should, in fact, hear us and understand that, in fact, this is an insidious adoption of a cancerous malignancy that we just can't tolerate in our society and remain free. Now, this is what Tennessee is going to look like after everything's all said and done. So that includes the Nashville area kind of in the center. Same thing. Now, they do have the maps for Virginia. I looked for the maps for Ohio, did not find them. I was told that the maps are available. I don't know that, but I was told that. So this is human free, yes ma'am. This is the graphics for Habitat 2, which was 1996. And notice that this is Mother Earth gently caressing and protecting human settlements. Speaks for itself. This is a quote from the 1976 Habitat 1 conference. It says that land, because of its unique nature and crucial role it plays in human settlements, cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. This first sentence says that the free market is not to be tolerated, has to be done away with. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. Think about it now. If you've made any money off of a parcel of land, and you drive up to that gasoline pump, and it looks at all the information that's available for you and determines that you have made a dime that's socially unjust, you pay a little bit extra for that gasoline. So that's just one way that social injustice can be implemented through a governance system. Now, if unchecked, in other words, if this system is left as it is, it may become a major obstacle in the planning and implementation of development schemes. Social justice, urban renewal, and development, the decent provisions of dwellings and healthy conditions for the people can only be achieved if land is used in the interest of society as a whole. Public control of land is therefore indispensable. I didn't believe this when I first read it. It was back in the 90s. There is a depository library for the United Nations. Tallahassee has one of them. I sent off to Tallahassee just to disprove. I wanted to disprove this because I didn't believe it was true. I asked for the entire plan of action, and I asked for everybody that had attended this for the United States. It is true, and I have a hard copy of the whole plan of action. So believe me, this has been going on for some time, and we're just unaware of it. Now, this is South Carolina. The majority of the people I speak to are all white. We are a house divided. When I was a young man, we had Thanksgivings, and we as a society came together and acknowledged a benevolent creator that has given us unalienable rights, property rights, right of privacy, a multitude of rights that we can claim as our own. And unfortunately, we have become a house divided, and that house is not standing, it is falling down. Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to punch a button, and Joe Neal, who is a state representative for South Carolina, is going to tell you what private property rights are all about. I encourage you to get a copy of this DVD, and if you have a friend that's a minority, take this to him and try to build a coalition of Americans that will go to their elected representatives and proclaim that fact that we have a creator that has given us rights, and this system is basically taking those rights from us one at a time. So with that, now here is Joe Neal.
What we're facing is a plan for growth and development that's being implemented by County Council here called Vision 2020. It is a flavor or a type of smart growth legislation. And what that simply means is that a vision has been developed by planners for this area. They want to dictate how growth will occur or not occur in this area. And by that result, profit or not profit by that plan. And what this plan does, very simply, is to have a vision of this area, the evolution or creation of villages They want to force all growth in this area into villages, high-density, high-population villages. Around these villages will be drawn what are called urban boundary zones. These urban boundary zones will delineate the village from the countryside. And those two, the village and the countryside, will be treated differently by this legislation. Property that is not in the village will find that its value is lessened, reduced, or eliminated. Property within the village will find that that property will gain or rise in value because that's the only place where development will be allowed to occur. Now, as an example, we had a resident here to put in an application to build a barber shop in his little community. He happened to own some property on the side of a highway in a rural area here. He was told that he could not. That instead, if he wanted a barber shop, he had to go into the little village nearby, or little community, it wasn't even a village, and purchase a site there or negotiate with someone who has a site to put up a barber shop. Now, what that did, this property is useless. The purpose in owning property is to find some way to make that property produce wealth, whether it's growing a crop or putting a small business on it. For rural people, particularly in this area, who have never had the opportunity to translate their holdings into wealth, to be told at this point that that can never happen, that they will be denied access to water and sewer, that the only place that water and sewer will be able to go will be in the villages that are designated by this plan. That's the problem. It creates a two-tiered system of people and societies here. Those who are in the village will be allowed to accumulate wealth, their property will rise in value. Those of us who are in the rural areas, who are not in the village, will find that the property values are dropping, that we're not allowed to do anything with the property practically that will produce any wealth. That robs these property owners of wealth. It's a takings, in my opinion, because of that.
Okay, can you hear me okay now? Okay, Susan Kelo lived in Connecticut. She had a small house in a subdivision, and the state of Connecticut decided that they wanted to take her property and give it to a pharmaceutical company. So the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that it was not under the jurisdiction of the federal government, kicked it back to the state. So the state edict stood. So they took her property. Well, as a consequence of that, nothing's happened. Pharmaceutical company did not move in. They tore her house down, and it's just sitting there vacant, not producing anything for anybody. There's no money going into county coffers for property tax or anything else. But the main thing that I want to bring out about this is that I attended a conference sponsored by the Castle Coalition, which took the case to the Supreme Court. At that conference, the mayor of Anaheim, California, came to that particular conference and said, "We are so glad that Anaheim no longer is going to take property under eminent domain. We are going to implement smart growth by other means." Now, that's what Joe Neal was just saying. You know, you take your property one right at a time, you're not compensated for it, so why use eminent domain? Because they do have to compensate you for the use of the property, no matter where it goes to a private entity or not. Actually, eminent domain is strictly meant for public use only. But at any rate, if they do take it and give it to somebody else, she would have been compensated. In this case, you just get one right taken at a time, and you have to defend yourself against that encroachment of those rights, and the elected official is using everybody else's money to victimize you. So now let me go on and leave that issue and talk about religion again, because I want to make the point that, in fact, this is indeed a religion. And here is what I think should be able to drive that point home. This is the Ark of Hope. It was intended as a copy of the Ark of the Covenant. It was made out of one tree in Germany, shipped over to the New England area, and hand-carried to the United Nations room, meditation room. And that's it right there, where it's set in state for a while. It has the eyelets on either side, so you slide the poles through it so you can pick it up without having lightning strike you. In my opinion, I don't know this to be a fact, but I think that guy is putting something before this, this box in the likeness of it has some kind of mystical powers to it. I have photographs of people standing around this box. It looks like they're praying. I don't know that they are, but certainly appears to be. And inside that box was something called the Earth Charter. Now, here is what Gorbachev had to say about the Earth Charter. My hope is that this charter will be a kind of 10 Commandments, a Sermon on the Mount that provides a guide for human behavior toward the environment in the next century. Now, there is a movement to make the Earth Charter a treaty mandatory on all countries in the world. And that movement has a number of organizations that are trying to bring that to fruition. As a matter of fact, the Earth Institute was trying to bring that to before the Earth Summit Rio Plus 20 that just occurred from that video that you saw where Hillary Clinton was at. The Global Eco Village Sustainable Community Network, by the way, one of those eco villages is right next to Lewis County in Tennessee. All of these organizations are pushing for the adoption of this Earth Charter as a mandatory requirement in the school systems and at the national and state levels. So now how do you get a citizenship, a citizenry that would agree to this? And I think this really brings it home how you're going to have people to accept this. Okay, well, at least we're down to the end anyway. So, what is government? And this is probably the best definition I've seen of a statement about what government is. I know Washington said it was fire, and if you don't treat it appropriately, you're going to get burned. And I think we're very close to that right now. But at any rate, government, properly constituted under God's law, is the transfer of specific obligations and responsibilities. You see, we have unalienable rights given to us by the Creator. We can't transfer that which the Creator has given us. We can only bestow obligations and responsibilities on something called government. Those obligations and responsibilities are what we designate. In other words, the people designate what responsibility government has in our society. Government becomes a corporation, a legal fiction, an idea that is described in a written format. The written document is a charter, a contract, a constitution, which contains the mission statement that spells out the purpose of government. Now, I have read lots of, probably more than anybody, I won't say a lot, but several Bill of Rights and preambles from various state constitutions. Now, I'm going to say that, in my opinion, of what I've read, this is the best definition of the object of government, and I'm proud to say it's in my Constitution, state of Alabama. And the sole object and only legitimate end of government is to ensure that future generations has access to gasoline. No, that it is to protect the citizen in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property. Now, I'm going to stop right there and talk about that phrase, life, liberty, and property. It's a phrase that was actually coined by John Locke. He was the third most quoted individual in the founding era. And Jefferson came along and said, well, now, that's redundant. Life and property life is property. Without life, there can be no property, so he substituted pursuit of happiness. Well, I'm going to leave this thought with you, and I hope you consider this as you go through your daily life this coming week. If government will not protect the most important aspect of property among the most innocent among us, do you think that they're going to protect your private property rights as an adult? And of course, what happens when government assumes other functions? It is usurpation and oppression. So that's it, folks, and I hope that you now have a leg up on where we're headed.